All right, welcome back to Broadband Heroes, another episode, another exciting conversation with some people smarter than me. I'm your co-host, Nick, here with my other co-host, Jade Pyros-Cavallo, and we are so happy to have some, again, very smart people from the Education SuperHighway organization to talk to us today. So let's jump right in with some introductions, and then we will jump into the meat of the Education SuperHighway. So maybe I'll start at the middle of my screen. Jenny, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Jade, for having us. We're really excited to be here. So I'm Jenny. I'm on the government affairs team at Education SuperHighway. I'll pass it over to Abby.
Hi, everyone. I am Abby Raudebush. I am also on the government affairs team here at Education SuperHighway. I'm focusing on the federal side of all things broadband policy.
Yeah, hey y'all. Hey Nick, hey Jade, hey everybody. My name is Sean Grinner, and I lead up our apartment Wi-Fi team and our focus on everything to do with public and affordable housing MDUs. So glad to be here. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much. It is we're recording on a Friday before a holiday weekend or holiday week, so I really appreciate the time. But let's jump into it. Before we get too much into the weeds, what do you guys do? Let's just what the Education SuperHighway, outside of being a cool name, what do you guys do?
It's a cool name. So the first word in the Education SuperHighway name is a good clue. So we actually started in broadband in schools. So that's what we used to do. It's not what we do now, but just kind of to start off, we did a lot of work with school broadband and then E-rate modernization. If you are fortunate enough to know about the E-rate world, if you know, you know. But then around 2020, we all know what happened. So the pandemic hit and the classroom went home. So I'm sure anybody that saw newspapers saw those heartbreaking photos of those little girls in the Taco Bell parking lot trying to do their homework diligently, but they didn't have internet at home and the schools were closed. So it's what do they do? So we ultimately pivot our mission, and it turns out that 1 in 4 households that are in the digital divide today live in public or affordable multifamily housing. So to answer your question, what do we do? So we focus on advocating on behalf of families who live in public and affordable housing because they need high-speed broadband just like the rest of us. So that's our focus today.
Awesome. I think obviously an admirable goal. And I was actually talking to Jade yesterday. We were talking about MDUs in general, and I think a lot of people don't quite. You could throw out the term MDU, and it's not always just a known term, right? I don't think people understand it. I don't also think they understand how big or how many MDUs there are. So maybe for context, is there any stats you want to throw out there that additional just around MDUs in general of the size, just to give people context?
Well, so our focus, like Jenny mentioned, is on the affordability gap. And it's estimated that there's roughly almost 17 million households that live in the affordability gap, meaning they have access to some level of internet, but the main reason that they remain offline is because they can't afford it. And within that spectrum, nearly a quarter, so nearly 4 million households live in multifamily housing. So, there's this kind of somewhat of a misconception that the problem with internet access is all rural, but that's actually furthest from the truth. That is a big component of it, but folks living in multifamily housing is nearly a quarter of that affordability gap. So a big opportunity in a big focus area.
Well, I think something else interesting about MDUs in the broadband access space is that they're not really classified as individual households, as apartments, on the FCC broadband map. So there's a sense that the problem could be maybe even larger than we understand it, because a lot of these buildings are counted as a broadband serviceable location instead of the 20-30 households that live within that actual facility. So a big gap in the way that the national data was put together to represent broadband access.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I guess to that point, is that why you think the misconception of people thinking, hey, it's all rural versus the MDUs, is it misunderstanding, lack of understanding of the data?
Yes. So I'll give you an example. So we started our apartment Wi-Fi work with MDUs about 4 years ago in Oakland. That was kind of our test bed area. And our goal was to see how inexpensively and efficiently we could essentially bring free Wi-Fi to folks living in low-income buildings. So our CEO, Evan, had some connections with different housers at the time. We selected 5 different pilot buildings and we lit those buildings up. And we essentially did everything except for run the new Cat 5e Ethernet cabling. We did all the equipment installation, we secured the internet backbone, we provided the service, we managed the service, we provided troubleshooting for the service. One of those buildings, surprisingly enough, it's about a block down the street from City Hall in Oakland. And I always love to use this building as an example, because in every single version of either the California or the national broadband maps from the FCC, it is shown up as served. And it is in fact unserved. The only provider that offers service there is a DSL provider, the local incumbent. They've never upgraded beyond DSL. So if it wasn't for us piloting, bringing Wi-Fi to those folks, they'd still be unserved, but every single version of any map ever created shows that they have internet service.
That's a little scary.
Well, it kind of shows we're building these government subsidy programs on, where they're being built on sand, right? We're not getting an accurate data set to base these investment decisions off of, and the people that are going to be left in the divide after this are probably those that aren't accurately represented on the data maps. So
maybe we could dive a little bit into, though, I mean, obviously the data, so you have the first problem is the data is bad. So you're misrepresenting or underrepresenting people that really need it. So obviously some big numbers. From I guess what you guys specifically do, I mean, Sean, you talked a little bit about from what you can do in the buildings, but what specifically, like, just let's make it real for the people listening. What do you guys actually do? Like, are you, from the time that you've identified that there's an issue for this building, what's next? Like, what are you guys involved with? Are you on the ground? Are your feet on the street? What are you involved with?
Yeah, the way I like to describe what my team and I do is we are essentially pro bono telecom consultants. That is really the best way to describe us. So folks that are in the multifamily industry, they are in the business of real estate. That is their business. Their business is not internet. So a lot of times they will outsource and hire a consultant to handle other aspects of the real estate venture. One of those being kind of broadband and internet. So we try to fill that gap, but we try to fill that gap for very specific stakeholders. So public housing authorities, low income affordable housing developers and property owners, and then most specifically state broadband offices or cities that are trying to do this at scale. So, as I mentioned with our pilot program, we started from, actually being the implementer and kind of, building these out on our own just to get a feel for it and understand all of the complexities that went into it. But we can't do that. We're a nonprofit organization. We're a small organization. We're not going to personally light up every single multifamily building across the nation. That's just not what we can do. But what we can do is provide that kind of pro bono consulting services to other stakeholders that want to scale these programs. So for example, we are supporting New York in their affordable housing connectivity program that's being funded through capital project fund dollars. We're supporting Massachusetts in a very similar way with their retrofit program and a number of other partners. And we do kind of a few key things. We help with program design and kind of customization on what that looks like. We can help with provider engagement and making sure that we drive awareness with all the different both internet and managed service providers that operate in this space. And then we also have a team that focuses heavily on kind of building owner outreach and engagement. So making sure that the building owners are aware of these opportunities that exist, they get excited for them, and they ultimately either apply directly or partner with a service provider to apply to bring new infrastructure, to bring new connectivity, to bring new options to their residents.
Well, and I think one of the ways that we interacted with early on is Education SuperHighway really helped on the challenge process and representing some of these populations. So it's my understanding you helped with the challenge process of every state or most of the states in the nation, the BEAD challenge process?
Yes, we did. I can confidently say we submitted challenges in every single one of the states. Some states only had 2 or 3 challenges submitted, but I can say we submitted challenges everywhere. So and I think I can also confidently say that we were the only nonprofit who did this at scale across the nation. There was others that maybe focused on their kind of key city or maybe their state or for very specific stakeholders. We tried to be the voice of folks living in these affordable and public housing properties throughout the nation. So we submitted nearly 29,000 total challenges across the United States. How many of those will ultimately kind of like change the maps and make those buildings eligible for funding is still yet to be determined as states kind of focus on finishing their challenge process and getting those certified with NTIA. But we try to be the voice for the people, and I think we did a good job of that.
And
29,000.
just type in just super quickly, just to say too, is all of this is pro bono. So these are the pro bono telecom consulting that he talked about, but then also helping states, figure out where are their MDUs, how can we leverage our state funding or our capital projects funding or whatever to help families in MDUs, because there are MDUs in every single state. That's all like pro bono consulting basically, so whether that's like at the municipal level or locality or state, it's all for free to just try to advocate on behalf of these families.
So maybe a little bit of a tangent, but I have to ask, and we can. I mean, obviously, takes very smart people. Takes a lot of work, as you said, it's pro bono. You are a nonprofit, but who supports you?
So we're really privileged with the folks that are on our team. I have actually never worked for an organization that has people as smart as the folks that work at Education SuperHighway. I'll give you a couple of examples on my team anyways. So my network consultant, who's done network engineering in the past, Peter, he was on the US Antarctic team in the Antarctica building fiber networks on the South Pole. So like, if you can figure it out there, I'm pretty sure we can figure it out in like the urban cores of Oakland and Philly and Chicago and wherever else. I have another gentleman on my team by the name of Eric. He was building out wireless internet primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. So we have people that have all sorts of different industry experience and knowledge, not only from kind of a networking and broadband perspective, but also from public-private partnerships, advocacy, government affairs, I mean, you name it. So the breadth of knowledge here is immense for sure.
I was just going to say, you're philanthropically funded, right?
We are philanthropically funded. So some of our major funders, which are on our website, are like the Emerson Collective, Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, other big tech, primarily tech organizations. We're also very lucky to have our CEO, Evan Marwell, as like our single fundraiser. So we operate a lot differently than most nonprofits do. A lot of nonprofits, they have like an entire grants team who's like constantly trying to fundraise, on small donor amounts. We get to actually focus on the work and what we do best. And Evan's the one who goes and focuses on fundraising for the organization. So we can offer all of these services pro bono, as Jenny mentioned.
Yeah, that's amazing. I remember the first time I got a call from, I think it was Adiyinka and Jenny, when I was running the Kansas broadband office, and you were offering to help us educate communities about ACP and kind of onboard onto, the subsidy. And I kept thinking, well, what's the catch? Because you were just offering everything for free. You had kind of did all the collateral and branded everything and helped us get the word out. And it really made a difference in our state as far as the number of people who took advantage of that program. And so I just think it's such a wonderful gift that Evan and the whole team of Education SuperHighway has given the nation in this quest to, really end the digital divide. You guys really are broadband heroes. So when I was reading about this report that I think Abby put out, that kind of focuses on the demise of ACP, and I think it was called No Home Left Offline, I thought we've got to get them on the podcast to talk about that.
All right, so Abby, take it away. What's this new report? I read it. I learned a lot. Obviously, it's lots of details, lots of depth. Give us the highlights. What's it about?
You're correct that it is a very in-depth report. I will say we worked on it for around 6 months. We've been working on it since the spring of this year, 2024. Just to give kind of some background of what led up to it, Education SuperHighway was very involved, like Jade said, in the Affordable Connectivity Program, outreach and awareness, enrollment, just making sure that the program actually worked and served the people who it was intended to serve. Of course, in the spring, ACP lapsed, ran out of money, and was not renewed in enough time. Education SuperHighway spent a lot of time on the ACP renewal efforts. We really believe in the program. We see the benefit that it gave to millions of households across the country. And we really didn't want to see that be the end of any kind of connectivity program. So what we did was we assembled a small team, put our brains together, and thought, how can we come up with a permanent solution? A lot of this was informed by work we did through our Get ACP program. We worked with partners helping them enroll individuals. We had an enrollment tool where we learned a lot of valuable lessons from that. We also worked closely with partners who were on the ground with the ACP, got intel from them, and kind of set ourselves up with a couple of guiding principles as we were beginning to dive into this. Some of those including making sure that a new benefit is beneficial, to use the same word, for those who need it most, for unconnected households in particular, those households that truly cannot afford to connect to the internet that is available to them. We also listened to the political concerns that were going on in Congress. There were a lot of differing concerns. There were a lot of voices talking anywhere from how do we pay for the program? What's a sustainable source for that funding? Who should get the benefit? What should the benefit look like? Things like that, because important to us was not just putting out this kind of like pie in the sky policy, but looking to see how we could realistically do something, especially because when we looked at it, we know that there are 16.3 million households who fall within that connectivity gap, who truly cannot afford to connect to the internet. And those people just simply can't wait for a solution, especially when we know the benefits of the internet. Having access to home internet can increase the annual income of low-income Americans by up to $2,000 a year. So not only is this necessary to live in the 21st century, but it's also necessary to things like economic growth.
Abby, I'm curious if, and when I read through it, one of the things that struck me was when you mentioned earlier about trying to listen to everybody, like get considerations, obviously politically and from businesses, and was part of that conversation around actually talking to the people that, the real estate people that own the buildings, that that actually have these assets, that they had obviously different motivations than obviously policymakers and everybody else. Was that part of the, research?
Yeah, absolutely. So just one aspect was thinking of the political considerations. But one thing we did, we initially came up with the framework for our policy proposal. And then we spent the summer meeting with different stakeholders. So we met with industry groups, we met with associations, public interest groups, we met with housing groups, people who are actually on the ground doing outreach and enrollment. We met with schools and libraries. We tried to cast a really wide net and think of all of the different people who are involved in ACP to make sure that their voice was heard and to make sure that these policies we were putting forward are actually workable for the people who need to work them.
So what was the, out of all of that, obviously this report, what's the recommendation? Like, what's the plan?
How are you going to fix it, Abby?
Yeah.
How are we gonna just, LFG, baby, come on, let's go.
Right. So in the magical world that I would really love to live in, where we just snap our fingers and this is done, our proposal looks very similar to ACP, but there are a couple of key changes that really take into account what we've heard from all these stakeholders. So just to start from the top of who would be eligible for the program, again, we're looking at really targeting this to unconnected households. This is in part because of the concerns around funding and how to make this program manageable. So as a starting point, to be eligible for this program, you must be unconnected currently or within the last 60 days. You must not already have home internet service, and you must fall at 200% of the federal poverty line or below. Now, the 200% was also in ACP. One thing, as we were doing our research, there were a lot of lawmakers who were indicating that they would like to drop the eligibility down to 135% of the federal poverty line. So what we did was we crunched some numbers, we looked at the data. And when I say we, I mean our wonderful data team, who is so much better at math than I could ever be. And when we looked into it, we saw that by cutting it down to 135, that was just a little drop in the bucket as far as funds, but it had a huge impact on certain demographics. So veterans, the elderly, or people who live in rural areas, that would cut about a quarter of them, around 25%. It would just automatically make them ineligible. So we didn't want to do that. However, by focusing on unconnected households, those 16.3, and also adding in 3 million households who live within that 200% federal poverty line range, but may fall in and out of connectivity, may have trouble affording internet one month, but not the next, we wanted to include them too. So we came to a population of 19.3 million. And by doing that, our proposal automatically costs $4.6 billion less per year than the ACP. And then when we look at other ways how they could prove eligibility,
you do better math than the government's what you're saying, basically.
Well, I'm saying we move things around.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. And I definitely don't do math better than but maybe our team does. So keeping a lot of the eligibility things the same, proving eligibility through things like WIC or food stamps, Medicaid, things like that. From talking to stakeholders, we saw that that was really beneficial and helpful for the enrollment process and for individuals. So keeping that as well. One of the things within eligibility that we did change was no longer having the community eligibility provision where a whole community is eligible for the program just by living in a certain school district. Instead, we wanted to have it more targeted. So the school can still be a pathway for enrollment. However, families will just now need to prove that they were eligible for the free and reduced meal program, whether that's actually offered or not in their school, just demonstrating that they would be eligible would still be their pathway. So really around who gets it and how do they get it, the biggest change is that they do need to be unconnected or fall within that likely to be disconnected range.
So let me ask you a question. Some of that I've heard, obviously everybody has an opinion when it comes to policy and funds. And one of the things I've heard is when people talk about, the connectivity is like, great, we can subsidize connections, but if you get the connection but you have no funds to have a laptop, have a computer, have a phone, like the basic things you need to actually run, connect it. What do you say to that, like to that situation where a lot of them they can't afford a computer?
Yeah, that is definitely a problem that we have seen because, like you said, it's one thing to actually have access to the internet, but if you don't have the device to get on it, having access isn't all that useful. So
there's an oven, but there's nothing to bake in it.
Right, exactly. So one of the things that we're proposing is through a referral fee program that happens with enrollments, which I can talk a little bit about in a second, would be that this program does have money coming in from ISPs through enrollments. And that money that comes in would be set aside in a specific outreach awareness enrollment fund that FCC could then use as grants to states and local organizations to help them do that extra step work to not only get people connected and enrolled, but to make sure that they can actually get online.
I think that's pretty important. Yeah, that's awesome. Are the ISPs receptive to that when you have these conversations with them?
One thing I will say is that I don't think anyone, no matter whether you're an ISP or another company, will definitely be in favor of any proposal that says you have to pay money into something that you may not already be paying money into. However, one of the key parts of our proposal, which we saw through our enrollment efforts and through Get ACP, is that there was a real disconnect between people signing up for the program and getting their code through the national verifier, but then actually applying that code to an ISP. Through our experience, there was about a 2/3 portion of that population that dropped off and never actually applied the code to an ISP. And we learned from partners that they were seeing similar things. So one of our proposals is to create kind of like a one-stop shop place where it takes the national verifier but expands it. So consumers can go, they can confirm their eligibility through the national verifier, just like they did with ACP, except importantly, now that web page will automatically connect them to the next one, which shows all of the eligible ISPs and plans that are available for them to enroll in. So now consumers wouldn't have to go one place to get their code and then go places 2 through 8 trying to look to see what ISP offers service in their area, how much the plan is, what the speed is, and compare that way. They just all have it right there in front of them.
Like a marketplace, so to speak.
Right. One central space, take out all of those extra steps. And then importantly, also having that back end access with ISPs. So on that web page, once they select an ISP, they can actually become enrolled. So after that, the only step is to have a service appointment to get connected. So because of that marketplace, and I kind of took the long way around to answer your question, the marketplace being one central location where this population, who by definition, because they're unconnected, are not current customers, they come to the marketplace. So they're coming to the ISPs, which cut down on the cost of acquisition for ISPs to connect these unconnected households. So it's kind of a trade-off. Also, the idea for this referral fee came about because it is a market-based practice that's already happening. ISPs already partner with other organizations and give them referral fees for helping sign people up.
Sure.
So we thought if people are coming to the marketplace and coming to them, we can probably take something that already happens in the market and apply it to this to make sure that there is that separate outreach awareness enrollment fund. So it all kind of goes hand in hand. So while no ISPs had told us outright, no, we would oppose this because of the referral fees, and I think some of them did see the kind of handoff that's happening there, the trade-off that now customers come to them, that it wasn't a super contentious point in our stakeholder meetings, although I am sure it's not their favorite aspect of our proposal.
I think it's so clever though, because that barrier to entry from the enrollment complexity portion of ACP was always a stickler for the least connected, the like never connected, right? Who didn't even necessarily have the digital skills to understand how to enroll. And so lowering that barrier and streamlining the process, I think is a great idea. Should we be, blessed enough to ever see this program come to light or its replacement? So what do you think? How do we best advocate for moving these ideas forward?
One of the biggest things that would be helpful to not just this policy, but to any broadband affordability policy is calling your federal representative, your federal senators. Sometimes I feel like a broken record. That's something that I suggest a lot, but also something that I promise does help. Offices keep track of constituents, people who live in their district or state, who call in and request things from the office. And the more they see a topic pop up, the more they pay attention to it. We've also heard through meetings that I've done with congressional offices that some of them say, I'm in favor of ACP. I'm in favor of still having a program like that, but I haven't really heard much from constituents about if it impacts them or how it impacts them. And so I'm not really sure where my state or my district stands. And so by calling them and urging them to still make an affordability program a priority, that elevates it within their office and just makes them even more likely to either sponsor legislation like what we're suggesting or vote in favor of it. So I promise it truly is helpful to just pick up the phone, call the office. You can leave a message, or you can even send an email. Tweets work if you want to tag them in it. They do look at their tags. You can also try any other form of social media that you want. Just any kind of outreach helps.
So I'm so curious, as someone who doesn't use X, are they still called tweets or are they called exeats?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm a millennial, so you could probably catch me saying tweets well into my 80s and 90s. I'm not sure that I'll ever remember that it is called something else, but yeah, I don't know.
Let me ask you a two-part question. So, obviously your advice is pick up the phone, tweet, call thing, like advocate. But the people that are aware of this are probably not the people that you're trying to support, right? I mean, like the people that do not have connectivity probably don't pay as much attention to policy as people like us that were in this industry. We're trying to do good and trying to move the ball forward. So I'm just more curious, like, how do you get the people that are in need? How do you get them to speak up? How do you get them to be aware that there are great people like you guys fighting for them, but to tell them what to do, right? Because I mean, again, I'm making an assumption, but like, I'm sure they don't pay attention to policy conversations that we do.
Yeah. And I think, along with ACP enrollment and figuring out how do we contact them and let them know this program exists, and advocacy, we have that same hurdle to overcome of how do we make sure that we're reaching the people who need to be reached. I will say that one of the biggest tools that we have is word of mouth. So someone who maybe is listening to this podcast, or if you happen to be talking to a friend, just keep passing that on, letting people know that it is happening. They may not be paying attention to policy as much, but that doesn't mean that they don't care about policy.
Yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm just.
Oh, yeah, of course.
There's like this divide between, people who have the capacity, the time, the resources to understand who's making the laws and to communicate with them in effective ways. And the people who need the services the most, I think, are those who don't understand that there's this whole cartel of, that's probably not the best word, a whole group of people who are there to serve their needs, and they need to hear from you. So it's frustrating to kind of bridge that gap.
But on an optimistic note, this is just another plug, and not even strictly pertaining to our federal report, but for also some of the state advocacy work that we do as well, is that local representatives are huge. So we've done, kind of like organizing work to get the word out, the importance of MDUs to states as Jade, as you know, there's a lot of planning to get your BEAD plan together, like a lot. There's an office, there's many, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So one example I can bring up is Councilwoman Villagran from, I think, San Antonio City Council District 3, I think. So there are, in every city across the country, there are basically lifelong advocates. They grew up in the community. That's what they do for a living, is they advocate for their community. So it's our job, we think, to kind of tell them, like, hey, here's some data on this kind of otherwise niche issue, broadband policy, not really going to follow, not going to pay attention. But if we provide the data, which we do have this wonderful data team that Abby mentioned, so we had the data to go to Councilwoman Villagran and say, like, hey, there are, X, I'm making up this number, 20,000 families, spanning 30,000 properties in your region that could benefit from such a policy, right? And then you get the Councilwoman Villagrans and, the other community advocates to say, go to the state or go to their legislator, et cetera, and kind of make the case.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good point. Getting those on the ground community champions to do the advocating.
Is that I guess for both those scenarios, is the idea that the awareness of let's assume people move forward with this proposal and there isn't the program there, is the way to get them to sign up into the marketplace to do this, if this is existing, is it the local piece, is it word of mouth, or is it a true marketing campaign to drive people to sign up? Like, what's your thought on what's the most effective way to do that?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of each of those. Some of the most successful enrollment programs in ACP were those local advocates, those small organizations working in smaller locales instead of like statewide or nationally. Yeah. Also places like schools, libraries, where people get a lot of information and sources already, but also through other means like traditional advertising, having it on the TV or radio, not just kind of having social media banners where if you don't have the internet, you may not see those, because we are trying to connect to a constituency that isn't traditionally connected to the internet like everyone else. It does take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, just making sure you can reach as many people as possible. But, like Jenny said, I really can't overstate just how important those local advocates and local organizations are in moving forward with enrollment, making government programs work, also getting the word out on things like a new piece of legislation or policies that may help them.
That's amazing. I think obviously you guys have an amazing mission. I mean, no home left offline, very catchy. I think it's obviously truly, I mean, you guys are, broadband heroes and helping move the needle forward. When you look into, obviously this report is a look ahead, is there anything else that you see with the changing political, changing technology environment of how things are deployed to bring broadband? Do you guys see any big challenges or opportunities going into 2025, 2026 that are just, things to sandbox, things to think about as you go into the new year?
Everyone needs broadband. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle they land on. So broadband is a historically just extremely bipartisan issue. So while we are we're going to see a change of administration, and people still need broadband. There's public and affordable housing in every state, red state, blue state, swing state, whatever. That being said, one thing for policy, and again, this is bipartisan, that we are kind of advocating for as we move into the new administration is with BEAD kind of 101, and of course, talking about the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Act, part of the IIJA that President Biden signed into law in November 2021. So $42.45 billion in broadband funding coming into the states. It's allocated to the states decide what to do. So that's BEAD in a nutshell. So some states have the luxury of having what's called non-deployment funds. So basically, once they allocate all their funds according to the law, so they do their unserved, their underserved, and then their community anchors, they're going to have the luxury of having funds left over. Some states, and we're kind of holding them up as examples. So New Jersey is one, South Carolina is another, have already said on the record, hey, we're going to have this non-deployment funds, and we're going to make an MDU program with our non-deployment funds. So New Jersey, Valerie Bullard, she's leading the helm there. She's doing $20 million toward public housing in New Jersey. South Carolina, Jim Stritzinger, he's another stalwart leader. He's got $5 million allocated to MDU programming. So I think another call to action just politically is if you have that luxury of having non-deployment funds, an MDU program is really kind of it's trending up in terms of like what states are seeing, it's a good use of their funds.
Oh, that's great. I call it slush funds because we didn't have one. We didn't have one in Kansas. So I give my friends a hard time,
There's some names for sure among the states that didn't. Yeah.
Amazing work can be done. Lots of amazing work on the digital opportunity front outside of just infrastructure. So it's cool to see people being creative and taking advantage of some of the innovative ideas that you're shopping around. But, are going to be affected. So that's awesome.
But I will say it's not even if they don't have non-deployment funds, they can't. So Texas is a great example. So Texas is a big state for anyone who has been there or hasn't been there.
Look at the map behind you. You can see it's
it's pretty, but also it's a high cost state in terms of like if they're running fiber, that's expensive. The cost of fiber, cost of labor, everything's gone up recently. So they're not going to have enough money to have non-deployment funds left over. What they did do though is that they got a lot of public feedback from their initial proposal, volume 1, saying like, hey, we'd love to see MDUs in this plan. They took that feedback from the public, and they just recently, about a month ago, they ran a whole RFI, a request for information, on MDUs. So they asked all the key stakeholders. So you've got housing authorities, community-based organizations, schools, libraries, all the people who are affected or live in multifamily dwelling units. They just asked for data, and good on Texas for doing that, because they're arming themselves to be able to make a data-informed decision in the future, because Texas has a voter-passed fund called the BIF, the Broadband Infrastructure Fund, which is $1.5 billion.
I'm sorry, BIF. Come on.
I know. It's like it's too much alphabet soup if you get used to it. But that's just one example of a state. They're not going to have non-deployment funds, and they're still exploring how can we serve MDUs in a creative way.
Yeah, I know Nevada did some MDU work with their capital projects funds a couple of years ago. So definitely on states' radars, just trying to find a way to make it all work. It'll be cool to see all these different pilot programs and take advantage of the best practices.
So I have a final question. This is nothing to do with policy, more just, well, maybe. So I think you have to be living in a hole not to know that obviously AI is a big part, has been, is everywhere, right? The all different forms of it, and has been a major impact to technology, to efficiencies. And your guys obviously the education superhighway. When I think of AI and the ability of what it can do for all people, I'm just curious, do you guys have a view, or how do you think about the ongoing advances of AI impacting just broadband connectivity? You may not have an opinion at all, but that's okay.
I don't know that we have an opinion.
Crickets. Nick, you love your AI.
Well, I do. I mean, honestly, I believe I think it's you can't ignore it. It's like it's one of those things that is out there that is taking a life of itself, and it also, because you can't have it without connectivity. And so I look at it from the perspective of it enables people that didn't have connectivity another tool for education, for healthcare, for learning. So I mean, to me, it all it does is make the need for connectivity even stronger, I guess is my perspective on it. So
yeah, I agree with that. It stresses the importance of connectivity, right? Because technology is scaling, exponentially. It's not like this linear curve that's just slightly growing. So the longer that one of these households remains disconnected, the more and more and more they continue to fall further behind. And AI is just another example of that, right? So it's not going to solve all our problems, but yeah, if we can't get people connected, they just keep falling further behind, and at some point they're not going to be able to catch up. And I think we're already at that precipice right now where some folks are just not going to be able to catch up. So like that's the call to action, and the importance that policymakers and just anybody in this broadband space needs to understand is like we need to solve this like yesterday, in fact.
Yeah, I think that's where I think some of the conversations that we have, even on this podcast, we've talked about where it's so much about connectivity, but the reality is it's what you're doing with the connectivity, right? And Sean, your comment, like that's actually terrifying to think that you're right. Some people, it may be too late to catch up, right? It's going to be so hard. It's so hard to catch up once technology's reached a certain point. But that's why, I think if more and more people understand the applications of what you can do with the connectivity, that's especially people in policy positions that probably don't even know what a tweet is sometimes. Well, guys, thank you so much. It's been super educational. As Jade says, I mean, you guys truly are broadband heroes. Education Superhighway, an amazing organization, amazing nonprofit with some very, very smart people. So if you guys want to learn more about this great organization, educationsuperhighway.org lists out your programs, your sponsors, and as Abby was trying to make sure we understood, please reach out to your government officials, your legislators, and let's do all we can to make sure we get these programs pushed through. So thank you again for being on. And for those who want to listen, we are on YouTube, Spotify, and on our website. So thank you again, guys.